Radio Split Ranch.
Hello and welcome once again to Radio Split Ranch, a monthly visit with the Capital Region's great broadcasters of the past and sometimes present. I'm Warren Garling when I'm not on the radio. In my attempts to capture the history of Capital Region broadcasting over the last 3.5 years, it's taken me this long to recognize another important facet in its evolution: public broadcasting. Our region has been a leader in the not-for-profit side of broadcasting since the founding of the Mohawk-Hudson Council on Educational Television, formed with the help from General Electric's WRGB-TV way back in 1953. WMHT-TV debuted in 1962, and 10 years later, WMHT-FM became the first non-commercial classical music station in the United States. This month, we're learning about the evolution of their second non-commercial FM station that in 2007 became adult album alternative WEXT, The Exit. And who better to learn it from than the man who brought it to life, the masterful Chris Wienk. Well, I've had the pleasure of working with this gentleman, and it's long overdue that I finally got him here behind the microphone at the Radio Split Ranch. Chris Wienk, thank you very much for joining us.
Warren, I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
It's been a while, yeah. We worked together in public television, which is a lot of your background, which we'll get to in a bit, public TV and radio. But it's been 20 years since I left it. Yeah, almost 18 years since I left WMHT.
It went by in a flash.
And it did. But we had a connection very early on, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But let's go way back and figure out where you're from and what got you interested in this crazy business and all that good stuff. Where were you born?
I was actually born in Albany.
Were you really? Now how did I not know that? So you actually came home when you came to work here.
I did. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was part of the problem though, because I came back here and folks said, okay, just go over to blah, 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 because we have to go places, right? And do things. Yeah. And I'm like, well, where's that? And they're like, well, you're from here. I'm like, okay, I left here when I was like 14.
Okay. All right. There you go.
I didn't drive here, so I have no idea where I'm going.
Yeah. Okay.
I still don't know where I'm going, but that's a whole nother story.
Now, at 14, were you already interested in this industry? When did it strike you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I think I was probably 12 or 13. We didn't really have a TV when I was growing up. We were one of those people.
Okay.
So we didn't have a TV when I was growing up, but there were periods where a television would all of a sudden appear in the house. And I can't remember exactly why or where this one came from that was there about 12 or 13. And I would wander around the house all day going, this is CBS. Because remember the booth announcers that did that, right? And so I was like, oh, those guys are so cool. I want to do that.
Really?
And so I would just wander around the house driving my parents absolutely nuts. Nuts. They still to this day, if I even start saying this is, they go, don't even say it. What? Oh, right. This is CBS.
That's crazy. Well, my mother says that I would hear my favorite commercials come on and I would come running from another room and sing along with, Babbo commercials and stuff that isn't even around anymore, But I knew all the words. Oh, no, I was a child of TV, and that was an early influence on me for sure, yeah. So where did it lead? Now, you said you left here when you were 14. Where were you living?
Yeah, we moved up north. You remember, nobody has maps anymore, right?
Right.
You remember the map of New York State, and it was sort of cut off somewhere in the Adirondacks, and you had to flip it over to see the rest of New York State.
Oh, okay.
We lived on the flipped over side, way up north on the St. Lawrence River. And my parents, I'm 13, 14 years old, right? I'm like, we are literally moving off the face of the earth. Like I was leaving civilization, moving out. Man, I loved it up there though. We were right on the Canadian border, and I used to get some really great Canadian radio stations. And those Canadian radio stations are literally the reason I decided I wanted to be in
that's
radio.
Interesting. Okay. Now, when I was young, in my teens, Dad would take us into the Adirondacks for camping because it's about all we could afford, to be very honest with you. And I had a problem in that I was constantly constantly listening to my transistor radio. But you get up into the part of the Adirondacks we were, and I'm hearing French being spoken, but none of it's very interesting. They're not playing music. I'm just hearing talk. And so when I went on vacation up there, I was not a happy camper. Sorry.
That's all right. Well, this was farther north than that. So we were way up in there. So the stations you were getting were probably the AM stations.
Probably, yeah.
And a lot of those were already moving more towards talk up in Canada and the bigger cities. But I used to listen to Shea 106 out of Ottawa.
Okay.
And Shea 106 out of Ottawa had this guy named Brian Murphy. He was on late at night, because a kid, you're up at night with your headphones on, I'm sitting there and I wanted to be Brian Murphy. Brian Murphy, he was the guy that had the coolest job on the planet because he used to get to play all the cool new rock songs when they would come out.
Yeah.
And of course, Canadian radio stations, they weren't playing the same rock music that we were hearing here.
That's true.
And this would have been in 1975, 76. So by then, Lee Abrams had sort of already started doing his thing down here. And so the rock stations down in America were really getting quite boring. But the Canadian rock stations and Shea 106, that's where I would hear Elvis Costello, Dire Straits, the old classics like Jimi Hendrix would be on there, but you'd hear Joni Mitchell, you'd hear, a lot of stuff. It was like the old progressive stations back in the day. And then in the middle of the day, so on the days during the summer, for instance, you should be outside playing and stuff, but there I was inside because in the middle of the day, they did a news magazine show and they would have these reports and they would do interviews with people. And it was just fascinating to hear all the stuff. And then they would back up an interview with a song that had something to do or would sound like it fit well.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting format.
Yeah.
But that was only for like an hour or two in the middle of the day. But for the most part, they were just a standard rock station.
Gotcha.
Fast forward probably 6 years ago, I had to go to a conference up in Montreal, and I actually got to meet the program director of the station.
Wow.
From back then, in that day. He's doing other stuff now. Now he's actually semi-retired, but he was like, I can't believe you listen to us. What? And I said, well, yeah, but 3 years into my professional career, I actually took a vacation and I went to Canada and I was staying in a farmhouse bed and breakfast because I could do it for like $10 a night or something like that.
Yeah.
You had to do some chores in the morning or something, but that's why it was so cheap. So anyway, I go to Ottawa and I'm like, I'm going to Shea 106.
Whoa.
So I went just unannounced, just walked right up to the door. Yeah. And of course, this was mid 80s. So by then security was a thing already.
Yeah.
And so they had the doors locked and everything. And I get there and they're like, do you have an appointment? No, I just was hoping to see if Brian Murphy might be around. Well, let me see if he's available.
Whoa. Well, so he was still there even 10 years later.
There. Yeah, he was still there. Cool. And he was like, he had sort of been relegated to, I don't know, probably the lowest shift possible. He probably had one show left or something.
Yeah.
He was sitting in his office, sitting there.
Wow.
And I got to go and say hi to him. And I was like, you're the guy that got me started on doing this.
Isn't it crazy when you can meet your heroes like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've told the story before. I'll make it very brief. I got a chance to meet Cousin Brucey and work with him one night. Yeah. On public TV, actually. He came up and did a fundraiser with us, a membership night. And for him to call me the next morning, which he did, to tell me that he was listening the next morning on the radio, I was on TRY at the time, that I sounded, very good. I said, well, I can die now. This is it, because
I'm done.
I listened to him when I was very young, living in Walden, New York. I could pick up, New York City stations. And so same sort of thing, heavy influence. Yeah. Cool. So you're living in the Netherlands.
Way up there. Oh, my God.
And what turns around? What happens? You go off to college?
I did, yeah. When I graduated school, I knew what I wanted to do, right? So I'd gotten accepted at Syracuse University.
Nice.
Did not go there.
Okay.
I went on a tour there, and bless their souls, great school, Newhouse, great stuff. But they, of course, said, well, yeah, but you won't be touching any radio equipment for however many years, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. And I'm like, really? And then I went on my second tour, which was Buffalo State College, not UB, the small one across town.
Yeah.
And I walked in and there was no such restriction.
Nice.
And I said, well, they also didn't treat me like a number, which Syracuse treated me a bit like a number. And so I was a little disappointed with the Syracuse thing, but I was like, okay, I got in. I don't have to go. That was just, it felt good to be able to be accepted to go. Okay. So I don't have to go. And I went to Buffalo State and I had a great time there. The radio station at the campus radio station was an AM carrier current station.
Well, so was mine in Boston.
So nobody could hear it because nobody knew that if you plugged in a radio, you could actually hear it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, what do you got? You're on the campus radio. How do you get that? No, nobody knew.
Yep.
Nobody knew. Now that said, they actually had in a file cabinet as we were like clearing out some stuff because it was just an absolute dung heap. It was just horrible piles of stuff everywhere. Yeah. We were clearing stuff out and the chief engineer and I are in his office and we're clearing out stuff and going through the file cabinet and he says, "What the heck is this? File from the FCC." Well, it turns out that the station actually had a construction permit.
I'll be darned.
To go on to FM.
Wow.
And it was about to expire.
Oh, no.
We had, I don't know, maybe 90 days before expiration, some less than 90 days, probably 75, 85 days, something like that. And we looked at it and we're like, oh, no. Well, what can we do? What can we? So we literally were like, just running around from office to office trying to get somebody to sign off on the expense of the stuff we needed to buy.
Yeah.
But it was only 100-watt mono stations. So, I mean, your transistor radio that you were talking about earlier probably had more power than this transmitter.
Yeah.
So, it didn't cost very much. It just, having to do it. So then I got trial by fire. I was the kid who had to drag the transmission line under the student union in the bowels of the whatever that was down there and all the, it was very scary.
Yeah.
Drag this thing. And then we had to string it up 10 stories to the top of the tallest dormitory. And we got some guy to come and install the antenna. About 3-4 months later, we're on the air. And our chief engineer is down at a bar, hanging out with other chief engineers from the commercial stations because he was an intern at one of them. And so he's hanging out with them. And the one engineer says, "Hey, let's listen to the campus station." Tells the bartender, "Put it on. It's on 91.3, whatever. And then he's like, I can't get it. But we're only like a mile and a half away. What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Let me get over there." And he's like trying to tune it in. He says, "Something's wrong with your guy's transmitter."
Yeah.
So not saying we were drinking or anything. We were in a bar. People were a little inebriated.
Okay.
We went up to the transmitter site, 10 stories up on top of the elevator shaft. Guy goes up with no belt to climb up the tower. And he says, "Oh my gosh, what?" We're like afraid he's going to fall.
Yeah.
And he's like hanging off of it by one hand. He's just like, "Anybody got a wrench?" Your engineer who installed this antenna installed it upside down. It's going straight up and straight down. We're like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, the people on the moon are hearing this real good."
Yeah, right.
So he came down because we didn't have a wrench to throw up.
Yeah, right.
But he had one in his car, of course. So he went downstairs and got it and then climbed back up there again with no belt.
Lord.
And flipped it around. And sure enough, the next thing you know, we could actually be heard all across the city of Buffalo. Before that, you could only hear us on campus, just like the AM carrier.
Yeah, exactly. I've never heard a story like that. That's really...
We didn't know. We had no idea.
What a memory. Yeah. Well, see, I know nothing about the electronic part of all this stuff. And I never cared to, when you used to have the the third class license to take the meter readings. I mean, I knew how to do it, but usually you just copied the guy ahead of you. Has the statute of limitations expired?
I think it has.
Oh, okay.
You're safe.
Okay. But anyway, yeah. So
I never did that.
Yeah, I don't know how to take things apart and put them back together like a lot of my friends do. And so, I just let somebody else do it.
I've always wanted to. So I used to.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing was that I actually studied for the actual license that you had.
Mm-hmm.
And the day I went down to take it was the day you didn't have to take it anymore.
Didn't have to do it anymore.
And all I had to do was like fill out this card and send away 3 box tops and I got an FCC license. And I'm like, this isn't fun.
No.
This is not right.
Yeah.
I wanted to take the test. And I actually was getting kind of irate with the woman at the FCC office. And she was like, "Sir, really, there's no test anymore." I'm like, "That's just not right. I want to take the test." Well, she says, "Well, you can take the first class license test." And I said, "Probably wouldn't pass that."
No.
I could probably
not if you studied,
okay.
Not if you studied for the third.
Yeah. I could probably do okay because I was pretty good with math and science back then, but I said, no, I probably won't pass it. And it's probably not worth the money to pay to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So you got some experience in college.
Yeah.
What are you able to do kind of anything you want on the station, or was there a program director that kind of kept you in line, or what'd you do?
There was a program director. He actually went on to be the general manager of MTV for a while. He's now the general manager at Toronto Public Media.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's a cool cat. He's a really nice guy. And, we feel like we got like the best schooling. He had worked at WLIR out on Long Island as a high schooler.
Nice.
And his high school had a radio station. So he had a lot. So he had a lot of experience in doing stuff. And so when he came in, he said, look, I know that we've sort of been able to do whatever we want in the past. He goes, but I really want to make a radio station.
Yeah.
And so he actually formatted the station to be one of the first modern rock stations back before it was even called modern rock.
Okay.
And, we were playing the hits of what we were playing 5 times a day or something like that.
Okay.
It was a lot.
All right. Yeah.
For a college radio station to be that tightly formatted. And again, remember, we were a 100-watt mono station. We ended up showing up in the ratings because the station was so tightly formatted.
There you go. And different.
And, what never happens with freeform radio is showing up in the ratings because there's no familiarity.
Exactly.
And we were breeding familiarity by playing stuff, and we played local music, and we would literally put them into rotation. So we would hear these local bands that we would choose 5 or 6 of them, and we'd play them, 40, 50 times a week kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and cool. The station sounded great.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had at nighttime after like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, there would be total free form.
A little more free form. Sure.
Yeah.
And we did that at our Carrier Current station in Boston also.
Yeah.
Same thing. Late in the evening, it was like underground is what it was called back in the late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. But they did you a great favor because you're not going to go to work for a station where it's free for all.
Yeah.
You're going to have to follow some formats and some formatics and things. And so you're learning in college to do that, which is terrific.
Like I said, I was very grateful that we learned it because it also taught me a lot for when I got out. In my first jobs, I was working at pop stations, and the rotations there were maybe an hour and 15 minutes or something.
Tell me about it. We played the number one song every 90 minutes on the first station I worked at. Yeah. Crazy. So Buffalo, did you stick around to work there, or where'd you wind up going?
No, I didn't actually.
And you did graduate?
Yes, I did.
Okay, excellent. I've talked to many people in that chair sitting with you that didn't stick around.
Yeah, both of my parents were teachers and college professors, so that kind of was an expectation.
Sure.
There was concern that I was maybe walking down the wrong path. My dad did try to convince me several times you might want to take up accounting, or, he says, you're really good at this stuff. You should, just have something to fall back on.
Sure.
And literally, my first paid job in radio, because I did work for free at the GR55 in Buffalo. That was a lot of fun, but that was during school, and it was technically my internship.
Okay.
But they had me go way longer than my internship. Like I was there for, I don't know, almost a whole year.
Nice.
I was only supposed to be there for a semester, essentially. Yeah. And I would go there, and Mike, the production director, was great because he was like, he says, you're really good at production. He says, all right, well, have fun. And he would leave. He would leave the building.
Oh, boy.
He'd go down the street. I knew where he was going. But, you know, he'd go down the street to a bar, of course. And there were fun stories in there. The program director was the guy who sang the Tops Friendly Markets theme.
Oh, jeez.
And he wouldn't let anybody see him sing it.
Uh-huh.
And he had to sing it like every 2 or 3 weeks because they would change this, that, or the other thing. And, and there was one of the days I was in there, he comes in and he's like, where's Mike? He had to step out. He's like, oh, is he down the street? Oh, man, because he knew he was at the bar.
Sure.
And he's like, it's 2:00 in the afternoon, whatever. What? Oh, really? It's going to be a waste to try and get him back here. I've got to record this stuff. I'm like, uh-huh. And I knew that he didn't want me in the room because he barely would let Mike be in the room when he did it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he had a beautiful voice.
Mm-hmm.
He could sing he was so good, but he was like, didn't want anybody to see it.
Yeah.
When he would do it, he would actually cover the window of the studio so that nobody would see that he was in there doing it.
You know, there are a bunch of us that have done that, you know. Joe Gallagher, you know, long time at WGY, same thing. When he would do Marge and his other voices, he would put, you couldn't look inside. Now, I didn't go that far, but I really didn't want to do it in front of people. I had a couple of voices I did, and so I would do the same thing. I'd wait when nobody's around and make sure that nobody can get in the studio, and I would hide to do it. I don't know what that says about us, but you know. Anyway, so he's singing, and you're going to be in the studio.
Yeah, and I had to be in the studio, and we recorded. It ended up being fine, and he walked out, and he was like, "That wasn't half bad." He's like, thanks. And I'm like, sure. And I'm like, well, you know, but I had to do so many things because, you know, the jocks, they didn't do any production back on that day.
Interesting.
And so it was all Mike, the production director. So they would come in, and I'm spacing on the guy's name now. There's a guy in the evening who came in early and would have to do his spots, and Chuck Lakefield, that's it. Chuck Lakefield. And Chuck is like, I think he just retired not too long ago. He was out at the Drive in Chicago, and big, real great radio guy. But he would come in, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, just push me all the way to the top." He goes, "I want to hit the compression so hard." And then he says, "And then bring the music way up." And he'd be sitting there higher. And literally I felt like I had the thing all the way to the wall. And we would record, and of course it would sound great because the engineers did such a great job holding that studio down. And, you know, and I would record all these things and edit all these things.
Nice.
And, you know, Mike would say, "They're going to do a Beatles weekend this weekend. Make a promo. Make 3 promos. No, make 4 promos."
Oh my Lord. Yeah.
And then he'd leave and go down to the bar. And
And you're an intern at this time, not getting paid for doing anything.
I was not getting paid
but
for it.
But it's still an education. My gosh.
Great experience.
And to be turned loose to do it. You know, when you were talking about going to Buffalo instead of Syracuse, the college I went to, Graham Junior College, the theme was, or the name of, you know, the logo, if you will, or the saying, the motto, that's the word I'm looking for, was learn by doing.
Yeah.
And we would pick on it. We'd say, learn by chewing. Graham Cracker University, you know, it was Graham Junior College. And we'd make fun of it. But, you know, that was the unique part of the place. From the moment you walk in, you're touching the equipment and you're learning how to use it. And there was no replacement for that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
it really is. And the stuff that Mike let me make and create in there, you know, there were a couple things where I was like, "So you're doing this, and what if I did this and this and that?" And did a whole bunch of stuff, and he turned around and goes, "I'm using all that."
Good.
I'm like, good,
great. All right.
And at that time, GR55 was top 3, top 4.
Nice.
All, you know, so I was like able to do all this stuff that would end up on one of the biggest stations in town.
Very nice.
And they had the other biggest station in town was 97 Rock, the big rock station, and that was just down the hall. And those guys were great to work with too. They were a lot of fun. There was one other thing in my college thing that I want to remind myself of, and it just popped into my head. You remember the song "Naked Eyes, Always Something There to Remind You"?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. For anybody who's listening who was in radio when that came out and was a hit, you're welcome.
Really?
I'm the one that did the edit for the original single release here in America.
Seriously? Yeah.
Now, uncredited, unfortunately, but you know, we had gotten a hold of a 12-inch version from England of that song, and it was 6 minutes long. Now remember, we were a tightly formatted station, unlike most college stations, so we were like 6 minutes is way too long.
Sure.
So I said, well, I can make it 3.5. And so I made it 3.5 minutes long.
Yeah.
And the guy from EMI was in, and they hadn't released it here in America yet. The guy from EMI was in town, and he happened to be listening because, you know, they listen for the college stations to see what's hot, what's new that they can steal and then maybe get on, you know, on their label and then release it.
Sure.
So he was listening, and he came by and he was like, we just signed those guys. They don't have a 7-inch version of that, but I recognize that was way shorter than the version. And they were like, you know, before the days of cell phones. So I didn't have a cell phone for somebody to call me, but they were like looking for me all over campus. They finally find me and they say, "This guy from EMI Records is here. He wants to meet you." Okay. So I walk into the station. And, you know, I don't know what to expect, right? And he's like, "Hey, I've been listening to this over and over and over again." He goes, "That edit you did on Always Something There to Remind Me, that was incredible." He goes, "How did you do that?" I showed him the machine I did it on, which was an old Atari 2-track.
Oh, boy.
And he's like, you did that on a 2-track? I said, yeah. With splicing tape? Yeah, with splicing tape. And he's like, he couldn't believe it. He says, you guys don't have any equipment in here.
Right.
So EMI helped us get equipment after this, by the way.
Nice.
And then they stole my edit.
Your version.
Which was fine. I didn't care.
Yeah.
I was like, this is
so they never
cool.
They never paid you for the work.
They never paid me for the work.
Man. Yeah.
It's all right.
I mean, I would have put up with just maybe co-produced by on the label or something.
Hoping I could get an edited by or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
well, that's pretty neat. And that's a remake. That was Dionne Warwick, I think. Yeah, from back in the 60s. Yeah. Wow, cool. Well, that's a nice feather in your cap, especially you're just starting your career, I mean, it's
fun to hear it, like, because I'll hear it on the oldies stations or whatever nowadays, and you hear it and it's like, oh yeah, because what we had done is we used the 12-inch single, which of course was designed for the dance floor, so it was much more boomy and bass heavy. So they basically used the same exact thing. They just pulled back some of the bass on it.
Nice, very nice, great memory. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's cool. So you graduate, and where do you head?
Well, I got my very first job was the day I graduated. So I graduated and had to have all my stuff already packed in the car because we lived 3 hours away, and that's where the job was in my parents' new hometown of Bath, New York.
Okay. And
so I had to drive home after graduation, and 3 hours later, I was on the air after graduating. So, there's pictures of me on the graduation floor, and I'm thinking, I remember, I gotta go,
Wow.
I gotta go, because I gotta be on the air at 6 o'clock.
That's not a bad start. Not a lot of folks transition like that.
Yeah, well, that was, it was only part-time, and it was every Saturday night I had for a while.
Okay, gotcha.
But it ended up being the station that I still call my first station, because even though my first full-time job was at WGVA in Geneva, that lasted for about 2 months. And then the station that I had been working on, that station WVIN in Bath, they didn't have a full-time opening. And then 2 months later they did. And I was like, so you want me to now quit that job that I just took and come back to work for you? Well, I haven't moved yet, so that'll be okay. And they're going to offer me another $20 a week. Okay, I think I can do that.
Yeah, I'll do it. That's it. Anytime you can get a raise. I moved to Tupelo, Mississippi for $40 more a week.
Yes.
From Albany, New York. Go figure.
Yeah.
But not a bad start. Right out of college. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty quick.
Where does it all lead? I know eventually you get to the nation's capital. How long is it going to be before we get to that part of the story?
Oh, it takes a moment.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
well, take us through it.
Sure. After I was at WVIN in Bath until 1988.
Okay.
So it was like 4 years. And my dad, the whole time I'm there, my dad's reminding me that, well, you really should pay attention, because what they pay teachers starting salaries is barely enough to make it wherever that is.
Yeah.
And he says, you're making less than that here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but I'm having fun.
Yeah. That's what it was about.
And everybody in town knows who I am.
Yep.
Small town, but I get offered a job. A friend of mine had moved from Elmira up to Rochester.
Okay.
And he was working at WXXI, the public radio station up there.
I know those.
And he says to me, Chris, you really don't belong in commercial radio. He says, you belong in public radio.
Interesting.
And he says, based on, and this was in the late 80s, there was already the erosion of content creation in commercial broadcasting.
That's true.
by that point.
Yeah.
It really had kind of started even before I was in it in 84. In the early 80s, I remember there was a lot of people just starting to move to just reading liner cards and not really being personality. And I'm not much of a personality per se, but that's not what I was in it for. So when he dangled this in front of me, I was like, oh, okay, sure. Why not? I applied for a job, and I went from making $7,800 a year to $13,000 a year.
Nice.
Which still, by the way, was less than the starting teacher salary in the small town where I was.
Yeah.
But my dad was very excited because I was going to work for his radio station, the one he listened to.
There you go.
He says, this might work out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Dad, I'm still being paid less than I need to be to live here, let alone to move to Rochester.
Yeah. Looking back, after 17 years in full-time radio, I was making $17,000 a year in 1986.
Yes.
And so when I left full-time radio, within 5 years, I was making 3 times that.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't done that, we wouldn't be sitting here talking. I would have had a shift today on some radio station somewhere, so.
For $20,000 a year.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I went up there. I worked at WXXI for like 4 years. I was the operations person for the radio reading service that they ran.
Okay. Yeah.
Called Reach Out Radio, and their director, she was awesome. She was a wonderful human. Just let me have more or less free reign.
Nice.
And do a lot of stuff. And I worked with one of the board operators. Who was this crazy guy named Andy. We did some really, really crazy things. But the goal, they wanted me to sort of help turn it into more of a sound of a radio station.
Ah, okay.
Talk station, because, obviously they're reading the newspaper and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I did that for a couple of years. And then while I was there, the director of the classical FM station decided she wanted to step back from daily stuff.
Okay.
And the manager of the radio, the vice president for radio, said to me, I want you to do this. And I'm like, I don't know anything about classical music.
Yeah, yeah.
So he says, but you know about radio. And he says, we need more radio infused in here. And he says, and you care about classical music, and that's all.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Good.
So that's what I did for 3 years. I was the manager for the FM station, the classical station. And then he left, and they had me overseeing both that and the NPR news station for a while before I got hired to be the director of broadcasting at Vermont Public Radio. I'd always prided myself on taking radio stations that were not doing so well and having them do better. So like the station
It's a great
in Bath, goal. Yeah, the station I was in Bath was number 11 in a 10-station market.
Oh, boy.
When I left there, we were number 2.
There you go. All right.
The number 1 station, we had eroded about 30% of their audience from them. So they were not as strong as they had been, but they were still number 1. So we used to do that. We're number 2 before even Snapple did, which I always thought was fun. When I saw them do it, I'm like, oh, we used to do that. That was fun.
Okay.
So then when I went to Rochester, the classical station, public radio doesn't really look at ratings the same way.
True.
But, when we look at ratings in public radio, we look at it from the standpoint of, well, the fewer people we have listening, the fewer people who are going to be willing to support us.
Exactly.
So we want more people listening.
Sure.
So one of the things that I was tasked with was to increase the audience.
Yeah.
And we did. We were doing very, very well. The classical station was, flirting with the top 5 in Rochester.
Nice. Now, I don't mean to interrupt you in your train of thought, but hopefully we can get back to it. Of course, at our age, it's a crapshoot.
Who are you again?
Yeah, exactly. I'm interested in how you educated yourself about classical music. Did you do it on the job? Did you do some extra research and stuff? I mean, I know when I did the classical hour on WKAJ in Saratoga Springs in 1972, I know I said Prokofiev. Okay. And anybody that knows classical music knows I wasn't pronouncing his name correctly. So what happened with you? How did you learn that stuff?
I was fortunate in that my dad listened to a lot.
Okay. So you had a little background.
A lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
And my dad speaks, 17,000 languages. So there was a lot of language like Latin and German and French and stuff like that was in my house a lot when I was growing up.
All right.
So I knew kind of how to say a lot of the words, which is funny because one of the first times I had to do an air shift on the classical station, I was filling in for the morning guy because he had called in sick, and I was playing something from Mozart, and I called the piece the Exultat Jubilat, and that's not how you say it, and I should have known that. Somebody called me and said, Exultate Jubilate. And they said it just like that with that sort of stuffy sound, and I was like, oh, well, thanks. And then when I got off the phone with him, I had to come out of the name of the piece. And I said, well, apparently I did this wrong the first time, so I'm going to try and get it right. And hopefully,
well, there you go.
Thanks to the caller for calling in. I appreciate
you're human.
it.
You're human and you'll learn. Yeah. See,
my dad, of course, was like, you should have known how to pronounce that. I'm like, yeah, I should have. But he says, yeah, there were those days where you just did not want to hear me.
Yeah. Well, in Saratoga, nobody was listening. So it was real easy. I mean, nobody called to correct me because it was the local bank that was sponsoring the hour, and they just wanted, to reach evidently that audience, but there was hardly any. I never got a call. Nobody ever called me and said, you said that wrong. And if I ran across a title that I really couldn't read, I just say the composer and move on to the next. Most of it, to be honest with you, was tracking one side of the disc and then flipping it over, track the other side. That gets you about 45 minutes, and you put a couple of small things in for the last 15 minutes. So that's what I did. Yeah, it's crazy stuff. But I'm glad that you had, even not knowing the music, you had some experience in the pronunciation, evidently. In a lot of cases.
And I also had the station's music director, Dave Glarum, was amazing. Like, really, he knew music like I don't even know anybody to this day who knows music the way Dave did. And so when I would describe to him what I was hoping the station would sound like, he knew exactly what I was talking about.
Good.
And he would bring me into the production studio with a pile of records and say, so this, and he'd dance on each of these records. And I said, yes, no, yes, no.
Nice.
And he mostly, probably 80-90% of what he would bring in there would be like, oh yeah, that's it.
Wow.
And so he knew, he and I sort of had this talk about, I'm not looking to play necessarily just the big names, because in all honesty, most people don't really know big names or even pieces, although there are a number of pieces that people do know, and there are a number of names that people know, but there are also a lot of pieces that sound in a specific space.
Okay.
So classical music has such a wide variety of things that you can play that, maybe nobody knows what it is, but it sounds like what they know.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's what I was looking to do. And so we really honed in on a particular sound up there in Rochester. And like I said, we were flirting with the top 5. I remember there was a friend of mine who ran a station in Orlando. And of course, Orlando at that time was not quite as big a market as it is now.
Yeah.
But it was growing and stuff. And he was always calling me up, because the people who watched ratings for public radio around the country would group stations based on market sizes and different, formats and stuff. And he would call me up and go, "You beat us again." Because we were pushing, and we were doing like a 3.5, almost 4 share in Rochester.
That's terrific. For the music of that sort. Yeah.
Yeah. My morning guy was great. Simon Ponton, he came to me and said, "Chris, I really like what you're doing with the station. I want to do things." And he goes, "I want to take the class out of classical music." And so he would create these little ad campaigns and did you know this man had syphilis? And it would be a picture of some famous composer. Died of syphilis or whatever.
Yeah. So
I don't know if we're going to put that out there, but
but you're humanizing, what's going on. Yeah. So where does it lead from there?
I sort of felt like I was hitting a ceiling there.
Okay.
And I was looking for a change. And one of my friends said, "Well, you should check out Vermont Public Radio." And I said, "Oh, okay, sure." And I knew that the program director had just left. He was running the Public Radio Program Directors Association back then. And I was like, "Well, I'll apply." So I applied, and the general manager there and we just hit it off. And so that has ended up where I was for a few years. And then he decided he was going to go take a job with NPR. And I cursed him from that moment on, because it was so much. He was like, the guy in Rochester was a great boss, and the guy at Vermont Public Radio was even better.
Okay.
And the two of them are like my 2 favorite bosses that I've ever had. They were just such great guys. But the guy left. He goes down to NPR. He's working on some stuff for them, and his main thing was, he liked to travel. And so he worked out a deal that he could be the guy who was NPR in Europe. And so he would do a lot of travel to Europe on this. And he was basically doing some really cool things over there.
Yeah.
And he even hired me as a consultant, and I went over to London, and we had a great time raising money on the air.
Cool.
Because he knew one of the things I love doing is fundraising.
Yep.
So he took me over there, and we tried an on-air fundraiser in England, an area where they don't do that. So they had a lot of the people who were listening were like, "What are you doing? You're asking me to give you money?" They didn't understand, but we did all right. We we did it like for a week, and we did not too bad.
Cool.
It was an experiment, I think, because we didn't do it again.
Okay.
That was fun. And that got me in front of a couple of other people one of the guys who applied for his job up in Vermont when he left was the manager of WJHU in Baltimore, the Johns Hopkins station. And he did not get the job in Vermont. And he reached out to me and said, "I really liked talking with you, and I'm now in need of a program director. What are you thinking?" I'm like, well, I wasn't thinking of moving out of Vermont, but let's talk. And so I ended up working at WJHU in Baltimore for a few years.
If you're looking for news,
I'm Jean Cochran, National Public Radio News.
Then you found the right place.
I'm Corey Flintoff.
From around the world,
I'm Mike Schuster in Zagreb.
in another state,
I'm Melba Gomez in Chicago.
or just around the corner.
Stories in the news now from around the Baltimore area. I'm Tom Olson.
When you're looking for news, it's all right here on one radio station.
This is WJHU Baltimore, your NPR news station.
Then moved to Connecticut. I worked at WSHU for a few years. And then I always call it my midlife crisis. I got out of radio for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Because I felt like, just I'd done that a lot.
Yeah.
I'd fixed a lot of radio stations. When I went to Vermont, they did not need fixing. I actually took the job because I was like, wow, they're already doing really, 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 really well. Can I keep a radio station from falling apart?
Yeah, that's another different kind of challenge.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. I don't know. I mean, they were number 2 in Burlington at the time, and the number 1 most listened to public radio station in the country per capita. Can I mess that up?
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
Well, I read a book once called "If It Ain't Broke, Break It," because there's a certain thing about doing the same thing for too long and not knowing when to change course or when to go over. You're not going to quite make it over the top of the mountain, so what are you going to do to get around there?
Right.
Yeah, and it guided some of my later thinking in broadcasting.
Oh, yeah. It was good. But so there I am, decided I'm going to get out of radio. What are you going to do? Well, I don't know. So I did some consulting work.
See, now, if you had gone like your father suggested and
I could have fallen back on accounting. I know. Had I only listened to him. Sorry, Dad. I know you're going to be listening to this. I should have listened to you.
So what did you do?
Well, I ran my own business for a while. I actually did some recruiting for public radio jobs, which I helped one of the recruiting firms sort of, he was already doing it a little bit, but I sort of helped him explode his search firm business. We were doing at one point, I remember doing at least 10 searches at one time for different radio stations and television stations across the country, mostly radio. But, so I did that for a bit. That was part of what I did. The other thing was, remember, I was a geek. I always liked equipment. So I also am a computer networking person.
Okay.
So I was designing and building computer networks. I worked with an environmental remediation company in Connecticut who needed a tech guy, a tech person, and I really should not have been hired by them to do it, but I was. So, and they were like a $25 million a year company, and there I was, their tech person as a consultant. I mean, I used to do things like, oh, here's how you do this. And I'd leave them the instruction sheet. And then the woman who was in charge, she was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call you. But I gave you the instructions, so you don't have to call me.
Exactly.
Trying to save you money. She goes, I don't need you to save me money. Like, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference, obviously, from going from public radio and
I wasn't
TV.
used to that. Trust
you weren't
me.
used to exactly.
I was not used to that.
Exactly.
And then one of my clients was an ad agency. One of the main owners of the company really liked working with me, and he said, what would you think about working for us? And I'm like, well, I am working for you. He goes, no. He says, I want you to work here and run the place and be the operations manager. I'm like, I don't know anything about an ad agency. What are you nuts?
Yeah.
He goes, well, but you've managed creative people in radio. He goes, it's the same thing. Designers, copywriters, it's all the same. I'm like, no, it's not. But he hired me anyway, and I did it for a couple of years, and it was a blast.
Oh,
I had
cool.
a really good time.
Yeah.
And
Now, where was this?
I was in Prospect, Connecticut.
Okay.
Southern Connecticut. Those folks were so great, and those designers, man, boy, were they good.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. There was this one guy. He was just so good. You'd look at his stuff, and you would think, that is literally a piece of art that is now going to be an advertisement for something.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. And then there was this other guy who was the most amazing person with Photoshop I've ever seen. But then I started to feel the itch of missing radio. I don't know what made me look at all. And that's when I looked and saw the opening at WMHT.
Okay.
And I was like, I thought about it for a minute. And then I realized, the woman I worked with, she was the CFO or something in Rochester at WXXI, is now the general manager here, Debbie Onslow.
Yeah,
and so I called her. And I said, Debbie, she said, hey, Chris. And we talked for a few minutes. And I said, so I see you have a job opening for the director for the radio station. She goes, oh, yeah. Do you know somebody who might be interested? And I said, I might. And she says, great. Who is it? I said, maybe me. And she goes, get up here.
Ah, nice.
So I came up and talked to her and did stuff and did a bunch of interviewing, and then came up and had a lunch with a bunch of board members. And I was like, I really like these people.
Yeah,
this is nice. And so I've been at WMHT now since 2002.
That sounds about right. Yeah. I remember the one of the first days you were there. I think we either went out to lunch briefly, but I know we talked for a while.
Yeah.
And this was the connection that we had when I was in college in Boston at Graham Junior College, and I couldn't get a full-time Monday through Friday air shift on the station because I do lousy with auditions. I started hanging around and doing more news. And so I wound up doing every night from 6 to 6:30 a newscast that I co-hosted with a gentleman by the name of Steve Martin. No, not that Steve Martin. Exactly.
He gets that all the time.
I'm sure he does. So when you and I are talking, you mentioned that when you were working in the D.C. area that you worked with Steve Martin. He and I co-hosted the college radio, news at half hour with, and it just blew my mind, first of all, that you knew him. And it's such a small world.
It is.
And so, so now where did you work together with him?
Well, we did.
How did you know him?
We didn't actually work together.
Okay, but you knew
I may
him.
have done some contract work when I was working as a consultant.
Okay.
With stuff that he was doing. But he was the program director at WAMU in Washington.
Yes.
When I was the program director at WJHU in Baltimore.
Oh, okay.
So, and we took the Diane Rehm show, which was based out of WAMU in Washington. We took that show on WJHU in Baltimore. We were one of the first national broadcast stations for her, because she then was moving to be a national host for midday for NPR.
Nice.
So we had a lot of back and forth. And of course, he was very high up in the public broadcasting world. And so I would cross paths with him a lot. Yeah, and then when he left there, starting his own business, and of course I had worked at this graphic design firm, so I pretend I know what I'm doing with graphic design now, because I did learn a lot, and they actually had me doing spec ads for one of their programs, and all of my spec ads got bought. Even some of the designers' ads didn't always get bought, which I always thought was funny, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I would literally have the two best designers look at what I just did. Does that look all right? Did I do all right? Is it fine? It going to work? And then they would point out things if there were things, which there oftentimes were things.
Okay.
So most of the ads that got bought were ads that they had tweaked for me.
Nice.
Or told me how to tweak.
Yeah.
But so I pretended I knew what I was doing, and I actually designed Steve's logo for his business.
How cool is it?
I did that for like 4 or 5 of my public radio friends who went off to do their own businesses.
Yeah.
Because people would say, "Ooh, who did your logo?" "Oh, Chris." "What?" They had no idea. Like, really? You know how to do this? I'm like, well, not really. I mean, I'll do it. If you like it, then great. If, run it by some friends before you actually sign off on it, because if you don't like it, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know enough to be dangerous, and I know enough to break every design rule there is. Every design rule. So designers who are listening to this, if they happen to be listening to this, are probably going, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah. You're right. I don't. But I still try.
Yeah. Well, hey, and you love a challenge, obviously.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always liked things like photography and other kinds of visual art. I have no business doing that.
Okay.
I don't even know if I have business doing the radio thing. The artwork stuff is definitely very questionable.
Obviously, you're working on almost 25 years where you are. So let's go through the evolution. I'm there as the director of the auctions.
Yeah,
and you helped me with that. You did some voicing of some of the spots that we did on the auctions through the 4 years that I was doing that.
But you noticed that I never agreed to go on television.
I noticed that. Yeah. I tried to get you on the schedule more than once, and I kept getting turned down.
You remember the movie Broadcast News?
Yes.
Albert Brooks Broadcast News?
Yes,
and he begs and begs and begs to get that that just give me the weekend anchor slot just once, once. And they get on there and they're like in the control room going, my God, somebody put a fan on him. He's sweating worse than Nixon in the debates. Well, that's me.
That's you. Okay.
Yeah. Between that and the fact that I look like a shifty used car salesman because I can't look at the camera.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I'm supposed to look where I'm supposed to look. I don't look anywhere near there.
All right. Well, then we'll take all that.
It's dangerous.
Yeah. And like my mom told me, perfect face for radio.
Exactly.
But I proved her wrong over the years. But anyway, so we had some fun working together, and you did have me on FM occasionally helping during membership campaigns when I got to prove that I really don't know how to pronounce names. I did it a couple of times. I tried to leave it to the announcers, but every once in a while there'd be a card to read that was about maybe tickets to something at SPAC, and I would still mess up the conductor's name and all that stuff. I remember it like it was yesterday.
I still do, so don't worry about it.
Okay, good. So you're doing the FM for quite a while. The classical FM WMHT, which has been around since what, 1940?
72.
I think. Oh, okay, 72. Only 72.
Remember before 1969 was when WFLY stopped being the classical station.
Oh, okay.
And for a couple of years there was no classical station here.
Oh, okay.
And then listeners, petitioned WMHT because the TV station was on. Mm-hmm. They petitioned it saying, "Hey, there's lots of public TV stations that are running public radio stations. We need a classical station in the area."
Okay.
So in 1972, WMHT FM signed on the air.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And has held its own over the years. And again, thanks in great part to what you do and how you run it. You had a great morning man for a long time, Bill Winans, who is a nice guy. He's just left the area. I forget where he's moved to. He's out in the East Oshkosh somewhere.
He wants to go where there's more snow.
Okay.
He really doesn't.
Okay.
But he loves a woman, and that's where they are.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That's cool. But Bill was a good guy and easy to work with as well. And so when does the idea come around for second FM signal?
The beginning of my time at WMHT, the station was in a bit of straits. It was not having a great turn financially. Mm-hmm. And the audience had dropped, was down to around 43,000 listeners a week from a high of probably up in the 60s or 50s or something like that. Mm-hmm. It dropped. There was a commercial classical station in town at 97.7 WBKK.
Okay.
Even though it doesn't cover the whole market, it actually had stolen a lot of the audience. Remember, we go back to my college radio station where we're playing a highly formatted college radio format. Mm-hmm. Well, WBKK, commercial classical stations, play the music as if they were like a hot AC adult contemporary station. So they play things in quick rotation. Yeah. They don't talk very much. They don't really say very much. They just have beautifully voiced announcers playing beautiful music. And so that station, even though it doesn't cover very many people, did really, really, really well here. It was hurting WMHT. So when I got here, that was the first thing I looked at. I was like, well, the reason we're losing is because that station's playing all the hits and we're playing really weird music, which we were. And we were also, they had just taken, somebody had the bright idea, which I'm saying that sarcastically, of putting some of the NPR All Things Considered morning edition type of news programs on the air. And during those times, the audience literally had just plummeted because the station was a 24/7 classical. That's what people were expecting. So when they were saying, well, but NPR News is where everybody's at. Well, but you're not putting NPR News on for the first of all. Yeah. Secondly, there's already somebody here doing that and they do it well. So why would you think to do this? So they were, whoever had put that on was hurting the station. Now, just before I got here, Debbie had hired a consultant to look at it, and he had already begun taking those things off. He hadn't taken the step of sort of honing in the music that was being played. And working on some of the formatics, but he had done some of that work. But mostly he was looking at these bigger things going, you're paying tens of thousands of dollars a year for programming that's literally turning your audience off. And that's why you're losing money. It's not, you're losing listeners, you're losing money. It's not good. So he had already started that path. And then I just took that and ran with it from there. I mean, he's somebody I'd known for years. And so when Debbie mentioned to him that she was talking to me, he was like, what are you waiting for? You should hire him. And so we did that. We basically took away that commercial station's audience by straightening out what we were doing.
Good.
Working hard to basically reclaim the mantle of classical radio station. So that was 2002. By 2005, 2006, that's when that station was really not doing well, and the owner was looking to sell. And Scott Sauer and I went to Debbie and said, here's an opportunity to have another frequency to do something with. And she was like, oh, cool. And so we bought it. What do we want to do with this? Well, we don't want to keep it classical. We want to do something else. There was not really budget to do that.
Yeah.
So we kept it classical.
That's right around what the time I was let go in some cutbacks.
There was that,
the budget was hurting in 2006, yeah.
We were holding on to the classical format for a while, and so we created a classical radio station for people under the age of 50.
Okay.
Actually under the age of 40, if but I know most people were still older than that, but that were listening, but that was our goal. So we reformatted the station with our stuff. I had Dave and Courtney who were working at the station. They were the other DJs, and they didn't know anything about classical music. And they were like, but I don't know anything about classical music. Like, you don't need to. I just wanted to say that's music of Bach. You don't have to go nuts about who's playing
and
or any of the
what
stuff.
movement it is and all that stuff.
None of that.
Yeah.
Don't even need that. Just we're going to treat it like it's, a pop station sort of.
Wow.
And it started to do really well. It actually started to hurt WMHT again, even though we had just fixed all of that. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I said might happen. So I don't want that to happen. So we revisited what now is WEXT.
Sure.
The format that I initially had proposed was for that new frequency was that we become, at that time, the format AAA, adult album alternative, is what the 3 A's was a big thing in public radio, was getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay.
The NPR Music Tiny Desk concerts and stuff like that were starting to get more traction. Some of the AAA stations in public radio were really market players in their markets. WXPN in Philadelphia being the main one of them. KEXP in Seattle just getting going in terms of moving more to a formatted sound. There's a station in Southern California, similar, a station in Minneapolis that had just started a year or two before we got on the air. So there was pathways for public radio to do what we're doing. I convinced both Debbie and the board that this was, something interesting. And our goal is not just to play stuff that people know, but we do play a lot of stuff people know, but it's really to expose people to a lot of new artists, and in particular, a lot of local music. Yeah,
I wanted to spend some time on that because when I was working at WGNA and programming them in the early 80s, we went real heavy as to committing to the local country artists. That was the slogan we used, if you will, and did a lot of talent shows and obviously were promoting on the air where the talent was appearing locally and that sort of thing. And you guys have gone the same route and very successfully with this. I see you very involved in the local, music community.
Yeah. When we were sort of coming up with the charter of what the station would be, our thinking was, well, we're going to make sure that a local musician is played every hour on the station. This is your home for local music in the Capital District. It's Local 518 on a Tie-Dye Wednesday from Katie Gallagher. Her song is Caught in the Middle. Waylon Jennings before that, and Matt Nathanson's new one, too. Find the playlist at wextradio.org. Got something new from Mo on the way, a classic from Echo and the Bunnymen. But now we're going back even farther for a true classic, Buddy Holly, wextradio.org. We have some national programs that we play and carry, but in the hours that where we're all local, there's a local artist. And now, almost 18 years in of doing this, there are some hours where we could have up to 2 or 3 because there are several local artists who have gone on to have bigger careers than just being somebody who plays here. People like Sean Rao and Fantagram and Jocelyn and Chris aren't there. These are artists who are touring the nation. Sawyer Fredericks, who was on The Voice.
Funeral parking only.
We're live at EXT, Local 518. Wow. Sawyer Fredericks, Funeral Parking Only. That's the new song.
Yes, it is.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you.
You've been working towards getting this to come out, right?
Yes, I have. I'm really excited for this tune.
What's that song? It seems more than just funeral parking.
Yeah, no, so it came about through a couple things. I was doing a songwriting challenge for an open mic, and they actually gave me the phrase funeral parking only. Basically, you had from the beginning of the month to the end of the month to write a song with that phrase. And that month I was like, all right, I'm going to skip this because I have no idea what I'm going to do with this phrase.
These are folks who tour around the country, get played on other radio stations. And some of them are actually hiring national promoters to promote their music. So when that happens, we tend to push those records a little bit more in a different rotation, not just as a local artist. So those artists could end up in the same hour as an actual somebody who's just playing in the area. And you know, not to diminish that at all, because that's a big focus for us. But when somebody is spending the money to get themselves promoted around the country, we feel, because we are dedicated to the local music scene, we feel that, well, if you're going to spend that money, that's an investment it's a scary investment. I mean, it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
No.
And, you know, they don't know if it's going to work.
Yep.
They don't know, you know, cause when a promoter calls me, says, I got a record that's perfect for you. Sometimes it's not, you know, so we don't play it.
Yeah.
So when these local artists from our area, local artists get talked to other stations and they don't get picked up there. Well, part of the reason they might not get picked up there is because their local station's not also playing it in the same kind of rotation that they're being asked to play it on these other stations.
There you go. Yeah.
So when Sean Rao or Fanagram would get worked elsewhere, we would play their songs just as if we were a station not from here. So, and they would get put into the current rotation. So like, I remember with Fanagram's Mouthful of Diamonds, their very first song that went out there, I think we played it like 200 or 300 times before that. And then when they got signed to a label and it started getting pushed around to the national stations, we added it back in because it had been already off our list for a while and played it another 300 or 400 times. So we played that. That was, you know, at this point, I don't think it's the number one most played song for us because there's been others since then. But for the longest time, that song had more spins on it than any other song.
Well, that's how we reconnected a little bit, because the last 10 years of my working before I retired, I was with a company called Voice Coaches, which was at White Lake Music and Host, the studios, and they produced Jocelyn and Chris. David Bourgeois was their manager and their band leader and drummer, and still obviously works with them. That's when all of a sudden, David comes to me and says, what do you know about Chris over there at the Exit? And I said, oh, if you can team up with him, you're on the right path, And so we kind of reconnected around Jocelyn and Chris. They're super talented.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The whole community. I mean, I remember when I said to Dave, "Here's what I want to do." Dave Michaels, the morning guy. I said, Dave, here's what I want to do. We're going to play all this music and we're going to focus at least one song every hour on a local artist. And he's like, is there enough out there?
Yeah.
And I at the time I had no idea. Honestly, I had no idea.
Okay.
I said, absolutely there is. I had no idea.
Yeah,
I really had no idea. In fact, I'm sure Dave could see right through that when I said that.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, absolutely. And, in all honesty, when we first started, there were several artists who were literally not from here, but we found some tangential connection, and so we called them from here.
Oh, sure.
One of those artists, I'll fess up to it, was Grace Potter.
Oh,
who was actually from Vermont, right?
Yeah.
She's from Vermont, but she went to St. Lawrence University. So the theory was she had to drive through the 518 from the 802 to get to the 315, which is where she went to school.
I love it.
And then on top of that, she played in Troy at Revolution Hall or something like that, like 5 times a year, 6 times a year. She was there like all the time as she was trying to launch her career.
That's true.
And so we basically called her local. We changed that pretty quickly. We, once we started, people started going, she's not really from here.
Yeah.
She wasn't the only one that people would say, that person's not really from here.
Yeah.
Now, that said, even to this day, when we have people who are here and then they move away and maybe they go off to school or they decide they want to try and make it big in music and they move to a city like Nashville. If they release stuff, I mean, they're just an independent artist. They're not going to get played anywhere. So if they release a song, I just got a new song from an artist that we played for a long time, Josh Morris. He's living in Nashville now.
Okay.
We're going to play it as a local piece because his family still lives here.
There you go.
He's from here.
Sure.
Every now and then somebody will say, but they're not really here. Yeah, I know. They don't play here locally. I get that. But they're from here.
There's a connection.
And we got to be proud of the people who are from here, even if they decide, I want to do this, but I want to do it more than just being an artist here. And, you know, nothing against the people who want to be artists here because that's great. But they say to themselves, I want to hit big in Nashville. It's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, so we want to help them.
So you're still working a regular shift. When are you on?
3 to 9.
Okay.
Monday through Friday. And
So
then wherever else I have to.
Okay. Now that's quite a long shift. So tell me that you do voice track some of it.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Otherwise, I can't be in meetings or anything else.
That's
I got
true.
a lot of those to be in. Who you gonna hoodoo now? There's Tony Joe White on your radio. I know. Were you ever thinking you'd ever hear a song like that on any station? People of Substance was Craig Finn's new record called Always Been. He teamed up with War on Drugs for this. It kind of adds an extra special vibe to Craig's work. I love Craig with the Hold Steady, but man, I'm kind of really digging this thing with War on Drugs. These guys are like everywhere. Did you notice that? Echo and the Bunnymen gave us a classic in 1980. That song, Rescue, was on the album Crocodiles. Speaking of classics, I've got something cool from U2 that's newly released. It's never been released before, but it came from, about 20 years ago or so. Asking for a friend? Isn't that the thing we say these days? Here's John Fay on WEXTradio.org.
Great success. I mean, you really have put that music on the map here in the market. There was probably a call for it, and nobody was answering that call until you put the station on back in.
It's funny. When we did, we noticed that all of a sudden stations started trying to do it again. It was pretty funny. I mean, it was great because I think the more who play it, the better. It's just like anything else that we play. Like we were first in the country to play Adele. We were first in the country to play Mumford & Sons, first in the country to play other artists in that same kind of space who maybe weren't as big as those have got. Hozier, we were one of the first to play him. We play these artists that end up getting played on other formats. So that's great because it helps make some of the unknown music that we play become more known. In the same vein as that, like if a station like WEQX picks up on a record that we're playing of a local artist or any of the other stations do, that's great because it not only helps that artist get more exposure, but it helps validate the whole idea of playing artists. Because where did U2 come from? Well, they were a local artist somewhere. Where did Bruce Springsteen come from? He was a local artist somewhere.
Sure.
They didn't just all of a sudden materialize.
Exactly.
Signed to Columbia Records and make tons and tons of money. In fact, there's countless stories about the Beatles and their attempts to get signed, right?
Sure.
It's the Beatles for crying out loud.
Right.
Really? Somebody passed on the Beatles?
Oh, quite a few.
They must have been kicking themselves.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So everybody comes from somewhere.
Sure.
And we got to be proud of the people who are here. This area, I think, has one of the best music scenes all around, music and arts scenes, period. I mean, I've been some places, even Baltimore and Washington, D.C., very strong music and arts scenes in both of those areas. Big cities, you expect that. I've been in Boston, huge scene. But this area, hands down.
Nice.
I think it's one of the best.
Nice to hear. Very good. Very good. I'm in bed by 9, so
Yeah. Well, that's fine. But I'll tell you, on the classical side, for instance, the London Philharmonic and Riccardo Chailly came to America to do 5 shows. One of those 5 shows was at Proctor's.
Wow. Okay.
5 shows in America for one of the biggest orchestras,
wow.
one of the most amazing conductors
and
in
so
the
they
world.
chose Albany for one of the stops.
They picked this area.
Nice.
Yeah.
That tells you a lot.
Tells you a lot.
Yeah.
There's so much going on here.
Now, are you programming both stations? Are you still in charge of both?
No, thank goodness.
Okay.
I'm sure the classical listeners are much happier now.
So you do have other people helping you out there.
Yeah, Rob Brown is programming the classical station.
Cool.
And Rob is kicking some serious butt over there. So.
All right. Excellent. Well, Chris, this has been terrific catching up and, learning a little bit more about your background. And it's long overdue. Here I volunteered for 30 years at public TV and then worked for them for a few years as well. And yet, for some reason, all the people I've interviewed so far had very little connection to it. So I'm thrilled that we finally got you in here.
Well, I'm humbled to be a part of that. The crew that you've been brought through in this little split. What do you call this? The split radio ranch?
The radio split ranch.
Radio split ranch. That's
it.
I feel very humbled to be here.
Well,
sitting in the chair that all these greats have sat. I mean, these are the people you've had on here, Warren.
Well, thank you.
Besides you, I mean, my gosh, Chris Warren, for crying out loud, the house, literally in this house.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I'm having a ball doing this to the point where I actually started a second podcast. And it's talking to all the folks that went to Graham Junior College from the early 60s to when it went under in 1979. And I've done 3 interviews. 2 have been published so far. And it's mostly to the college community that's still out there. And we call it Graham Lives or Graham Lives. You can call it whichever way you want to pronounce it. We're trying to keep the name of the school alive because a lot of great people went through it. And we want to share the story.
Oh, that sounds great.
So we're having fun. I'm having a ball. I'm twice as busy as I used to be here, and in addition to still doing some voice work. So, but I'm loving it.
That's great.
Again, Chris, thanks for coming, and we got to do lunch again here soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we should probably try to get you over to the Louis lunch, which is all the commercial guys, pretty much. Bill was going to come before he went and moved, and so he never made it. Bill Wyned's never made it to one of our lunches, but we'll have to get you on the list so you know when we're getting together.
All right.
Take care and continued success, sir.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks.
Radio Split Ranch.
You gotta love the evolution of not only Chris's career, but public broadcasting in the great Northeast over the last 60 plus years. Chris's path took him through 10 different radio stations so far in his still busy career, which when added to our running total of call letters worked at by our 42 guests so far brings us to 422. I thought for our closing air check time travel this month, we'd continue the public broadcasting theme with a little help from an old friend, WGY's Joe Gallagher. There was a time when I worked full-time as auction manager at WMHT-TV as Warren Garling and did part-time air work on the radio as Chris Warren. You'll hear Joe blow my cover briefly as this interview from April of 2006 gets underway. If you want to have some fun while you're listening, drink a shot of your favorite spirit every time I say the word absolutely during the 6-minute stint on WGY. It'll make your day. Hope you can sober up before next month, when we'll be back with another victim bitten by the broadcasting bug. In the meantime, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
Jonathan Kamara is going to try to swap and get better weather for it. It looks awful now, but maybe he can do something for us. Now we're going to go to the... Now we're going over to the on-air auction manager at... that's not good. Andy, that can't be good. Mr. Garling? No. Hello? Andy, we're going to have to I knew...
You're not joking?
That's what we got here. Either he's been disconnected or it is Garling, not Girling. And I don't blame him for being upset because I got the bad information today.
You're in trouble. All right, I'll be right over.
All right, the on-air auction manager at WMHT calling about their auction today, and I was given some bad advice on the name, and apparently it's Garling, Warren Garling, not Girling, and then, so he was on there. Are you there, Mr. Garling? No, apparently not, Andy. Andy, could you think?
Let me just get his number. I'll be right over.
Okay, could you get in here today? That would be nice. I mean, the auction starts today, and I know that they want to talk about it. And being the on-air auction manager, that would be what he would do right now. And okay, we got Andy is slower than my younger son getting ready to go to baseball practice. He takes forever. If he were in the major leagues, he wouldn't get out there till the 3rd inning. He just doesn't. Okay, here comes Andy now. Andy, all right. Going to get Mr. Garling hopefully back on the phone and talk a little bit about the big auction they do over there. And he's dialing up the phone now. He has one good hand, one bad hand. He injured a digit last night while he was working at his other job as the King of Happy Juice as a bartender. And he was splicing limes with a knife or something, and is that him now? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Garling, the on-air auction manager at WMHT. How you doing, sir?
I'm fine, Mr. Gulager. How are you?
Gulager. Now listen to that. Now see that? Now listen, I have to apologize.
Joe, how long have we known each other? How long have you been at WGY?
You go by the name of another name. You go Chris Warren.
That's no excuse.
I thought, I didn't know. He said Girling, and then it's Garling with an A, right?
Well, I just don't know how my finger hit that disconnect button a few minutes ago. It's a complete accident.
When it first happened, I thought it was Gerliger's fault.
Come on, knock it off. No, we're sorry about the It's Garling. Absolutely. I like garlic, right?
Well, you know, they say it doesn't matter what you say about somebody in the newspaper or on TV or on the radio as long as you get the name right, Joe. You can't even get the name right.
Now listen, the auction.
The auction.
Today
starts at 2 o'clock.
All right. Now,
WMHT.
It's online and on TV, right?
Absolutely. You can go there right now and you could bid on some items that are up for bids, like an auto lease from Cooley Motors, and we've got a great Glenn Sanders event. Is one of your kids getting married soon?
Oh, jeez, no. Come on.
Well, you said he was 6'4".
Well, yeah, but he's 15. He needs.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, maybe you could have a Sweet 16 party for him there. We got a great deal at Glenn Sanders for you.
All right. That's one of the items you could win.
Absolutely, if you're the high bidder. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
And, just anything you could almost mention anything, Joe, and we've got it. We've got hundreds of restaurants involved this year, so there's some place to eat no matter, where you like to eat and what kind of food you like. And we've got bedroom suites. We've got a week.
Suites.
Yeah, we've got a week at Camp Bearberry up in Lake Placid for the whole family.
Wow.
How about going to see where the Beatles started out at the Cavern in the Cavern Club in Liverpool?
You could bid for a trip there?
We do. We have our PBS Friendship Tour, thanks to our friends at Visit Britain, and that's always a big draw. We have a complete bathroom makeover, which is nice, from our friends at Security Supply Corporation.
We could use that at our house.
There you go. Or maybe right there in the studio. I understand it smells like a locker in there.
Like a sneakers.
Yeah.
Too many young employees around here. Okay.
There you go. So there's so much going on and so many things to choose from, and we're on the air a total of 62 hours in the next 9 days, Joe. Do you think you could do that?
Straight? No, it's not straight. No, I couldn't. No, I don't know I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But you know what? You have probably one of just about everything on there, don't you?
Absolutely. Everything from fantastic artwork. In fact, on Thursday evening, it's Art, Wine, and Collectibles Night. We have quite a few collectibles from many different areas. And now that you put me on the spot, or put myself on the spot here, I've forgotten the names of some of them. But there's a lot of things that folks collect, and we've got plenty of those on Thursday evening and throughout the week, really. And tomorrow night, Sunday evening, is our travel night. So we have trips and we have stays at great hotels from around the country. And any night on the auction, you can take advantage of one of our deals of the night, and it's actually a trip to anywhere that you'd like to go for a special price.
Nice.
So there's just so many things to choose from.
All right, so WMHT, you can catch us starting today, 2 o'clock this afternoon, right?
Yes, and the fun part is that we're in our new studios. There's a whole new look to the auction. We may even let Joe back on the auction if he would just return my calls. And because we've changed things around, and you can't get things backwards anymore, and it's a lot of fun, and we hope everybody will tune in.
Now listen, we would have had another minute, but you got hung up on us.
Yeah, that's what I did, Mr. Gulager.
I'm sorry, it is Garling and not Girling, the on-air auction manager over at WMHT. Hey, thank you so much, and you have good luck for the auction. We'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Also, Chris Warren on one of our sister stations here. 756 News Talk Radio, 810. Good morning.
News on your schedule. Go to WGY.com for news, traffic, and weather. We'll even deliver fresh podcasts to you every day. 810 WGY on demand. It's free at WGY.com.